The history of radionics. The history of radionics started in the beginning of the 19th century, a time of great advances in science and technology. Electrical power was discovered and used for driving machines and giving light to the cities. In this moving time, Dr. Albert Abrams became father of what we call today, radionics. Albert Abrams was born in San Francisco around 1863. He studies medicine in Heidelberg, Germany, and got a medical degree there in 1882. He then went back to the United States and was professor of pathology at Cooper Medical College until 1898. In these days he went more and more away from orthodox teachings and was finally dismissed from the university. Between 1910 and 1918, Abrams published several books on a medical technique he called spondylotherapy, a manipulative technique not dissimilar to chiropractic and osteopathy, but involving electricity. In the following years, he discovered the foundations on which radionics was built, and therefore Dr. Albert Abrams could justifiably be called the father of radionics. What he discovered can be described as following. He took a healthy man, facing west and thumping his upper abdomen, listening carefully to the changes of reverberation. Then, he let someone hold a sample of cancer cells near the subject's forehead. When a sample of the cancer cells touched the man's forehead, the percussion sound changed from resonant sound to a dull sound. He concluded that the vibration of a diseased cell sample was received by the human body and affected the human cells. Abrams published an account of his theory in 1922 in a book called New Concepts in Diagnosis and Treatment, and called this reaction E.R.I., electronic reaction of Abrams. In further development of this procedure, Abrams realized that the samples need not necessarily to be in contact with the healthy subject, but can be placed in a metal box, which is wired and connected with the forehead of the sound person. The information of the sample, usually a spot of blood, could be transmitted via this line into the system of the person, and the reaction could be observed by thumping on the upper abdomen of the person. Different diseases resulted in reactions on different places on the abdomen of the sound subject. By this Abrams was able to diagnose a variety of disease only by using a blood spot of the patient. However, different diseases showed up at the same place on the abdomen and could therefore not be distinguished. To resolve this problem, Abrams put a box with resistors in between the blood sample and the sound subject, suspecting that every disease has its frequency and that an appropriate filter will only let distinct disease information pass through the resistor box into the wire and to the subject. The settings used by Albert Abrams on his black box was called rates. And some of the rates used by Dr. Abrams are still the same we use today in modern radionics, for example the 50 ohms for cancer, which you will find still in the rate books. Abrams does not stick with the analysis only, but also try to treat his patients with his method. To do so, he put some remedies into the dynamizer box and connected it with the patient, testing the abdomen reflex again. With the remedy attached, the dull thumping sound ceases, and Abrams concluded that the disease information was, at least temporarily, erased or attenuated in the system of the patient, making recovery from the disease possible again. However, beside his scientific talent, Albert Abrams was also a very illustrious personality and a business-minded person too. He liked to stand in the midpoint of public attention and disputed a lot with his medical colleagues. It is also said that he made a fortune with selling a variety of models of his black boxes to the medical practitioners.
Abrams offered training in the use of these magic boxes, charging $200 for a course, after which students were loaned the devices, under strict instructions to never open them, and entered a franchise scheme, regularly sending a percentage of their profits back to Abrams. By the early 1920s, there was said to be more than 3,500 radionic practitioners, and Abrams' savvy business model allowed him to amass a fortune of over $2 million.
Although all his activities attracted positive attention within the medical practitioners, also a lot of resistance from the established medical societies arose. He was soon called a quack and his methods were tried to be discredited.
Spurned by the death of a man whose stomach tumor was declared cured by an osteoclast practitioner, the American Medical Association had a sample of blood examined by an osteoclast practitioner. The machine detected diabetes, malaria, cancer and syphilis. The sample had been supplied by a rooster.
Albert Abrams died in 1924 from pneumonia. By this he passed legal prosecution, which was already announced. But he left several thousand practitioners behind, which were using his black boxes successfully, and further developed the idea of radionics. Ruth Drown, the next step. After the death of Albert Abrams, many practitioners proceed with Albert Abrams' work and used it in daily practice. One of the most successful and renowned successors of Albert Abrams was Ruth Drown, a person with an exceptional talent for both electronics and radiosthetic intuition. Ruth Bamer Drown was born as the third child of Annette and Morton Chase. Her father was a photographer by profession, therefore she got early knowledge about techniques used in photography. She married at 19 and had a son and a daughter. After the early separation from her husband, she moved to Los Angeles and bought a gas station, for which she was in charge by herself, a quite uncommon situation with regards to this time. After several years, she moved to the Southern California Edison Company, and because of her remarkable technical ability, she advanced there quickly toward the position of a department chief. Stimulated by a lecture on the radiotherapy of Dr. Abrams given by Dr. Frederick Finch Strong, she gave up her career at the Edison Company and went to Dr. Strong, first as a part-time secretary. However, soon her special talent for radionic analysis was discovered and she began to work according to the method of Dr. Abrams. She then moved to Dr. Thomas McAllister, who supported you with books and medical knowledge. A one-year study in Kirksville on histology and physiology followed. Due to illness of her mother, Ruth Drown had to return to Los Angeles. There she attended a chiropractic college, completed her degree in 1926 and was licensed in 1927 to lead a chiropractic practice. In Ruth Drown's belief, every condition in the body, whether a diseased organ or a psychological state of mind, can be detected and differentiated by typical frequencies which are emitted. For analysis of a patient, she used a blood spot as witness for the patient and a by herself enhanced black box of Dr. Abrams. Instead of using a sound subject, she used a stick pad, which was a rubbing plate that caused a so-called stick to indicate a yes or no. For treatment, the vital energy of the body was reinformed by using the correct rates, which resulted in new and sound cell formation in the body or organ. Initially, the patient was connected to the black box. However, with further development, the witness was used for treatment only and the healing information was broadcasted to the absent patient. Ruth Drown built the first radionic camera in 1929, called the Homo Vibra Ray camera. The camera was able to produce photographs from inside her patients using the appropriated rates for targeting the intended tissue. However, only few people were able to work with this instrument and to produce viable images. She established the Drown College, where students were educated in chiropractic, medical and radionic procedures with a curriculum of over 5,000 hours or lessons. Ruth Drown edited and published the Journal of the Drown Radiotherapy, and the magazine, The Philosopher's Stone, and was also active as a spiritual teacher and author. Like with Albert Abrams, Ruth Drown was suspected quackery by the medical associations. In a double-blind study at the University of Chicago, she was not able to make correct diagnosis, so that her method fell into disrepute. In 1951 a Drown instrument was sent across country borders in the USA, which was penalized by instigation of the Food and Drug Association. Ruth Drown was put on trial but was only fined to pay $1,000 United States dollars. Too many witnesses had spoken in favor of her. However, in 1963 she was again put to trial under high media attention. Her labs and her instruments were destroyed or confiscated. During the following legal action, she died from stroke in 1965, broken by the hostility of their opponents. During her life, Ruth Drown had treated about 17,000 patients successfully and had developed multiple radionic instruments and electrical physiotherapeutic machines using short and long wave frequencies. Ruth Drown was not the only successful practitioner in these days in the USA. Beside the old Abrams instruments and Ruth Drown's Homo Vibra Ray instruments, Several other inventors had built their own instruments. Caldwell and Bronson, with the Calibro Magnawave. Wigglesworth founded the Pathometric Corporation and sold the Pathoclast, while the Ohio organization marketed the Radioclast. However, after the last trial, radionics remained generally forbidden for the use in humans in the USA. Therefore, the further developments in radionics in the USA focused mainly on the use in agriculture. Pioneers in agricultural radionics. The first company performing radionics for agricultural use was founded by Curtis Upton, a trained engineer, William Knuth, an electronic expert, and Howard M. Strong, a chemist.
On the east coast of the United States, one of Upton's Princeton classmates, Howard Armstrong, who had become an industrial chemist, with many inventions of his own, decided to try his friend's method, in Pennsylvania. After taking an aerial photograph of a cornfield, under attack by Japanese beetles, he cut one corner off the photo with a pair of scissors, and laid the remainder together with a small amount of rhodinin, a beetle poison, on the collector plate of one of Upton's radionic devices. After several 5 to 10 minutes of treatment, with the machine's dials set to specific readings, a meticulous count of beetles revealed that 80–90% of them had died or disappeared from the corn plants treated through the photo. The untreated plants, in the corner cut away from the photo, remained 100% infested.
Upton, Knuth, and Armstrong combined their talents, and the first letters of their names, to form UCACO. The new company's goal was to relieve the farmers of unwanted pests by this new method. As scientifically inexplicable as it was simple and inexpensive. In the West, Upton and Knuth contracted with 34 artichoke growers to treat their crop against plume moths. The contracts were written on the basis of no control, no pay. All the growers paid the service charge of $1 an acre, a tiny fraction of the costs of spraying insecticides. This business model was objected by the large pesticide industries, which tried to discredit the successes of Upton, Knuth and Armstrong. It is reported that Upton frequently treated people, which was forbidden at that time. An agent got his wife to take money for a requested radionic treatment, for which Upton was accused and subsequently convicted to jail. After this episode, UCACO was dissolved. New instruments. Hieronymus, the father of the modern instruments used in USA. Hieronymus began working in radio in 1913. After he received his license, he began working with KDKA in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where he took part in the first ever public radio broadcast. As a radio operator and electrical engineer with the Rainbow Division in France during World War I, he worked to develop a wireless telephone. It was there that he observed certain metals and minerals had unusual properties or emanations, a discovery that led him to radionics. By 1930, Hieronymus was working with radionics inventor J.W. Wigglesworth to improve the Pathoclast, the successor to Abraham's oscilloclast. The Pathoclast was considered to be the most advanced condenser-tuned radionic instrument ever made, incorporating vacuum tubes for amplification and other electronic features. It is also important to realize that by the time Hieronymus began designing his own version of the Pathoclast, in 1938 Hieronymus got retired from his regular job and founded the Radiation Laboratory to fully concentrate on instrument building and radionic research. Derived from the concept that all elements emit a specific emanation, Hieronymus built a radionic analyzer using an amplifier, 2 condensers and a prism. This instrument was patented in 1947. It was a Hieronymus analyzer which led to an important discovery made by John Campbell, the editor of a magazine called Astounding Science Fiction, in 1956. John Campbell wrote Hieronymus concerning his unusual discovery.
When I began working with the machine, I learned that it didn't need a power supply. Then I learned that they worked, despite the fact that their wiring system made absolutely no logical sense. From that, I derived a new concept, a theory, and made a crucial experiment. I have a model of your analytical machine, simplified and streamlined to the ultimate. It consists solely of the circuit diagram. I have a symbol of a prism, not a real prism, mounted on a national velvet vernier dial. That, and a small copper loop, alone appear on the front surface of the panel. Back of the panel, the circuit diagram is drawn in India ink on standard drafting paper. The prism symbol rotates in its appropriate place in the circuit diagram. The spiral coil is drawn in India ink on paper glued to the back of the panel. It is connected with the symbolized vacuum tube plate through a condenser symbol by means of a nylon thread. The other end of the coil drawing is connected to the symbolized vacuum tube cathode by a second nylon thread from my wife's sewing kit. The machine works beautifully. The consistency of performance is excellent. We are working with magic, and magic doesn't depend on matter, but on form or on pattern rather than substance.
He also found that less educated people and children could work perfectly and very accurately with the analyzer, while technicians and scientists had more problems, the more educated the less accurate. Although Hieronymus believed that analytic energy is the carrier of the radionic effect and therefore never believed in a virtualized radionic instrument, Campbell's experiments showed that the effect of radionic instruments are not performed by the instrument alone, but by the interaction between operator and instrument, an effect already seen with Ruth Drown's homovibra camera. After a life of research, Galen T. Hieronymus died in 1988 in Clayton, Georgia. His two-dial instruments and the rates for these instruments are still the mostly used types of instruments in the USA today. Radionics in the United Kingdom. Although invented in the United States, Albert Abrams' methods and instruments were also used in Europe by many practitioners. But they were not only used for analysis and treatment of patients but also improved by some inventive minds. And they were also put to the test already in early beginning, to approve or disapprove the effectiveness of Abrams' method. In 1925, Sir Thomas Horter, physician to Edward VIII, George VI and Queen Elizabeth II, and his committee produced a report on their tests on William Ernest Boyd's anemometer, a modification of the diagnostic technique developed by Albert Abrams. In the test, Boyd was asked to differentiate between two different substances placed in the dynamizer at random. In the first round, the tests of William Ernest Boyd were complete failures and his results were much less than what would be expected by chance. However, after complaining about electronic interference, William Ernest Boyd undertook further tests at his insulated residence with Whatley Smith of the committee, in which he was able to differentiate between substances with remarkable accuracy. For example, he determined when a sample of saliva on filter paper was placed in the dynamizer correctly 25 times in a row. This was estimated at being done by chance alone at 1 in 33 million. Most of the other tests thereafter yielded nearly 100% accuracy. However, overall, the committee obtained numerous negative results with other era practitioners of the Albert Abrams and William Ernest Boyd variety, when dealing with diagnosing diseases, much like in the USA.
The Horter Committee stated for conclusions as following: that certain substances, when placed in proper relation to the anemometer of William Ernest Boyd, produce, beyond any reasonable doubt, changes in the abdominal wall of the subject of a kind, which may be detected by percussion. That no evidence justifying this deduction is yet available from the work of those who practice with the apparatus, as yet by Albert Abrams himself. That the phenomena appear to be extremely elusive, and highly susceptible to interference, so that in order to obtain reliable results it is necessary to take the most elaborate precautions, particularly as regards the elimination of effects due to irrelevant objects. That it would be premature at the present time, even to hazard in the most tentative manner any hypothesis as to the physical phenomena here described.
This early, at least partly positive results, led to a more receptive position towards radionics practitioners on the British Islands. While radionics fell into deep hibernation during the Second World War, interest in this method rose again after 1945. As mentioned, the shipment of radionics instruments across country borders as well as exporting these instruments to foreign countries was extremely difficult. For this reason, in the UK, a skilled engineer was asked to rebuild Ruth Drown's instruments under her consent and according to her original plans. This engineer was George Delaware, who was born in 1904 in the north of England and in later life became a civil engineer in the pay of Oxfordshire County Council. In 1953 he resigned, to focus his work on radionics, in which he then became the pioneer in the United Kingdom. In Delaware's imagination, the information containing part in a radionic instrument was not the cumulative resistance of any built-in electrical circuit, but the angular relationship of the dials and their correspondence to each other. The skillful division of the full length into two different sections was his idea of radionics tuning. He derived this idea from experiments with rod-shaped antenna, which he had divided by a slider to obtain different frequencies, like it can be done with a string. He also said about his instruments,
"They are effective only if the operator is able to control his thoughts and form a clear picture of the disease or organ, or whatever it might be, with which he is dealing."
George Delaware was a very inventive man, a man who had one new idea per minute. Many of his ideas have been published in books and numerous publications. From 1957 to 1967 he published a quarterly journal called Mind and Matter, containing articles about radionics and his new ideas and inventions. Later on, a radionic newsletter was published until 1986. Beside the regular radionics instruments for analysis and broadcast, they also built and discovered multiple other instruments, like the Delray lamp, the caloroscope or a sonic instrument. He also discovered the critical rotation point, which was used in many agricultural experiments. A most famous instrument was the Delaware radionic camera, which was similar to the one of Ruth Drown. As with the Ruth Drown system, only few people were able to use this instrument properly and to produce viable photographs. Especially George Delaware's wife Marjorie was an exceptional radionics practitioner with a highly developed sensitivity and genius especially for this work. She produced impressive pictures with the radionic camera, and most of the rates coming with the Delaware instruments today have been created by her. As like with all other former famous radionics pioneers, George Delaware was sued in June 1960 in the High Court by Catherine Phillips, a disgruntled former customer, who said that her health had been ruined by using the Delaware diagnostic instrument. In particular, she said that the box could not possibly have the benefits that Delaware claimed for it. After 10 days of argument, the judge eventually found for Delaware. Too many positive witnesses had spoken for him and his work. However, the costs for this trial had been high and Delaware could not claim any money back from the denouncer Miss Phillips, because she was receiving legal aid and could not pay him back anything. George Delaware worked another 9 years with only slightly diminished momentum before he died in 1967. His legacy on information and ideas about radionics are well worth studied by every student of the radionic art. Recent developments in radionics. George Delaware was not the only radionic pioneer in the UK. After the Second World War, also other genius minds worked in the field of radionics, inventing new methods and instruments. Darrell Butcher, an airplane engineer, worked with pattern rather with electronic boxes. He invented the Peggotty board, which is still in use today, mainly for treatment of skeletal and muscular problems. With an instrument called the straw hat, multiple treatment could be realized for a distinct patient. Malcolm Ray, an electrical engineer and radiesthesist, invented an instrument using magneto-optical cards. In his idea, the information of a sample, represented by an invisible field, could be determined by dowsing, stored and reactivated by using patterns drawn with magnetic ink. The instruments use these magneto-optical cards and rod magnets for their activation. This system fathered the today well-known Sanjeevani card system, developed in India by a radionic practitioner having used Malcolm Ray's system. Malcolm Ray also designed a new rate system, using dial settings from 0 to 44, for more accurate instrument setting. David Tensley worked closely together with Malcolm Ray. He had been studied intensely the Indian philosophy and was the first to introduce the subtle anatomy of man into radionics. Derived from the old Indian sages and from theosophic teachings of Alice Bailey and the Tibetan, Dewokul. While initially Radionics was mainly concerned with the physical functions related to anatomical structures and physiological functions, Tinsley draw the attention to the appropriate functioning of the chakras and the subtle bodies, like mental, astral and etheric body. He also draws the attention to the subtle anatomy as the origin of any pathology. David Tinsley was a very active writer, and his many books are still the foundation of modern radionics today. With upcoming of affordable computer systems, the instrument building turned to PC-based systems. Initially small calculators were used for building radionic instruments. Later on, based on the global consciousness and the quantum field theory, instruments using random number generators have been developed to perform radionic analysis automatically. However, also completely non-electrical instruments have been developed, like a holographic instrument, emphasizing that the radionic practitioner and his mind is still the crucial key in all radionics work. The Radionic Association. The Radionic Association was founded in 1933, initially as a loose coalition of people interested in radionics. In 1960 the association was consolidated as an incorporation with the goals to support radionic education and research, as well as to set ethical and practical standards in performing radionics. The Radionic Association is still active today, supporting the idea of radionics with information and support for radionic practitioners. The attached School of Radionics offers a 3-year schedule of professional courses in practical radionics. To get more information on the Radionic Association and its educational program, please refer to their web page, radionic.co.uk.